It was a cloudy morning, with a heavy sky and a light drizzle falling over the city. The streets were calm, businesses were just starting to open, and the distant sound of horns echoed on the horizon. On the sidewalk of a simple neighborhood, Baidu, a scruffy brown stray dog with a needy look, was rummaging through a pile of trash with his nose. He was hungry. His stomach growled, and he had no idea when his next meal would come. Among scraps of food, papers, and plastics, something shiny caught his eye. It wasn't a bone, nor did it smell like food, but rather a small, transparent plastic envelope, sealed, containing what looked like a metal card inside. The metallic part reflected the dim morning light, gleaming like gold amidst the dirt. Baidu curiously sniffed it and picked up the object with his teeth. The dog didn't know, but that card was a hardware wallet, a physical digital wallet that stored cryptocurrencies, holding a Bitcoin balance equivalent to a small fortune. With his muddy paws, Baidu kept walking through the busy streets of the neighborhood, carrying the strange object in his mouth. He didn't know what he had found, but something about that day, that moment, felt different. The gray morning continued its course as Baidu wandered aimlessly, his paws leaving marks in the mud on the sidewalks, small traces that soon disappeared under the incessant drizzle. In the air, the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery was both an invitation and a bitter reminder. As much as that scent drew him in, the chances of getting anything were slim. He was a survivor. In his brown eyes, there was a mix of sadness and determination, marks of years spent living on the streets. Many knew him, but few truly cared. Sometimes he would get a piece of stale bread or a quick pat, but his life was guided by a silent routine of searching and waiting, never certain what would come next. That day, however, he carried something unusual: the small metal card, protected in its transparent case. Though he had no idea of its significance, the object seemed to lead him toward a specific destination. Perhaps it was instinct, perhaps it was the weight of hunger, but he kept walking until he reached the corner where the neighborhood grocery store stood. The grocery store was a small place, with faded walls and wooden shelves holding bags of rice and beans. On the door, yellowed posters advertised sales. Baidu knew the place, not for its products, but for the scraps that occasionally appeared on the sidewalk. He had found small acts of kindness there before, like crumbs of bread or leftovers. Upon arriving, Baidu placed the metal card on the ground, right at the entrance. The plastic cover still protected it from the dirt, and the metal reflected the diffuse daylight like a small jewel. The dog sat next to the object, silently, his gaze fixed on the store's door. Inside the grocery store, life went on as usual. Mr. Antonio, the owner, was a middle-aged man with a serious expression but a generous heart. He calmly organized the products, while the sound of the cash register and the creaking shelves filled the space. To him, it was just another ordinary morning. Baidu waited. His silence was more expressive than any bark. He didn't make a fuss or ask for anything explicitly, but his presence seemed to carry a kind of expectation. People walking by on the sidewalk began to notice the dog. Some glanced quickly and moved on, while others stopped out of curiosity. Something about the scene seemed different, as if the dog were guarding something important. Inside the store, Mr. Antonio remained unaware of the scene at the door, focused on organizing bags of flour and checking the stock of canned goods. But outside, the metallic shine of the object caught the attention of an elderly man passing by. He stopped, bent down, and examined what appeared to be a card wrapped in plastic. The man squinted, studying the symbol engraved on the card, a Bitcoin logo and an inscription indicating it was a digital cryptocurrency wallet. He had vaguely heard about such things but had never seen one before. Carefully, he picked up the card and entered the grocery store, drawing the attention of a few people. The commotion piqued Mr. Antonio's curiosity. He took the metallic card in his hands. He didn't know much about technology but could tell there was something special about the object. The weight, the finish, the design, everything indicated it wasn't just an ordinary piece of metal. The engraved logo was familiar, something he had seen in online ads or overheard in conversations about investments. Murmurs began to grow among the customers in the store. A young woman, holding her phone, confirmed it was a hardware wallet that likely contained access to Bitcoin. The news spread quickly, and speculation took over the store. Words like thousands of reis, fortune, and investment echoed, turning the atmosphere into a whirlwind of comments. Meanwhile, Baidu remained motionless at the entrance. his ears lowered and fur drenched from the light rain. He didn't know what he had started, but seemed aware that something important was happening. His gaze pierced through the glass doors, fixed on Mr. Antonio. The shopkeeper felt a tightness in his chest. It was a tough decision. The object could change his life, but he couldn't ignore that it had been brought to him by a hungry dog. Baidu didn't understand the value of the card, but seemed to trust that it had some purpose there. The rain began to intensify, and the tension inside the store reached its peak. Mr. Antonio held the card, now aware of its worth but also of the responsibility it carried. Outside, Baidu shivered from the cold but continued to wait. Afternoon fell, bringing an even heavier sky, as if reflecting the weight of the decision hanging over the grocery store. Inside, the air was tense. The small hardware wallet, with its metallic sheen, rested on the counter like an ancient treasure. The growing curiosity of the customers mixed with the stifling air of the store, while the rain softly drummed against the window panes. Standing behind the counter, Mr. Antonio held the object in his hands. His eyes examined every detail, but he knew its true value lay beyond what he could see. That small device contained digital codes capable of transforming lives. It represented something he had never imagined holding, a fortune that could change not only his story but also Baidu's and many others. Outside, Baidu remained still under the entrance awning. His soaked body and muddy paws gave him an even more evident air of abandonment, but his gaze remained steady, fixed on the store. There was something about him that seemed to transcend hunger or cold, as if he knew his presence there had a greater meaning. Meanwhile, the crowd grew. People brought umbrellas to watch from a distance, whispering among themselves about what was happening. Some took photos, documenting the scene. Baidu had become a central figure, the protagonist of a story whose ending no one could predict. Inside the store, Mr. Antonio took a deep breath. He knew the decision wasn't simple. Selling the hardware wallet could change his life forever, paying off debts, improving his store, securing a stable future. But every time the thought crossed his mind, he was confronted by the image of Baidu. That dog, who had brought the wallet there, had nothing but hope. The shopkeeper observed the object one more time and, with steady hands, carefully wrapped it in a piece of brown paper he usually used to package goods. The act of hiding the piece from view seemed symbolic, a way of saying that it was not just a valuable item but a responsibility. He left the store in silence. The murmurs of the crowd ceased, and all eyes turned to him. Rain trickled down his forehead, and his clothes were soaked, but he didn't seem to care. Kneeling before Baidu, the scene took on an almost cinematic quality. Carefully, Mr. Antonio placed the package on the ground, right in front of the dog. Baidu sniffed the paper but didn't move. It was as if he understood that the value of the gesture went beyond anything he could physically carry. The crowd, initially silent, began to react. Some people, moved by the moment, stepped forward to leave small donations. Coins, bills, and bags of dog food were placed next to Baidu. Mr. Antonio's gesture had sparked a sense of generosity and compassion that resonated with everyone present. As the rain intensified, Baidu finally stepped inside the store. For the first time, he was invited to stay. He curled up in a corner where Mr. Antonio had left an old towel to dry him off and fell asleep. The small metallic card remained on the counter, carefully guarded, as the weight of that choice spread throughout the community. The next morning, the sky finally cleared. The story of Baidu and the mysterious hardware wallet had already spread. It reached social media, with photos and emotional accounts from those who had been there. The headline, "Dog Finds Fortune and Transforms a Community," circulated from profile to profile, garnering thousands of views. Among the curious visitors who came to see Baidu and Mr. Antonio was a well-dressed woman, accompanied by two young men carrying folders. She introduced herself as the director of an NGO dedicated to stray dogs and explained that she had seen the story online. But she had more than just good intentions. After inspecting the wallet, she revealed that it contained the equivalent of a small fortune in Bitcoin. The woman proposed buying the wallet from Mr. Antonio, ensuring that the money would be used to transform Baidu's life and help many other dogs. Overwhelmed with emotion, Mr. Antonio agreed. He knew the value of the discovery was greater than his own needs. Days later, the grocery store underwent renovations funded by part of the money. Mr. Antonio was able to improve his business and continue helping his community. The remaining funds were donated to the NGO, which began building a shelter for abandoned dogs, named after the dog who had started it all, Baidu's shelter. Baidu, meanwhile, received special care. He was taken to a veterinarian, bathed, fed his first full meal in years, and given a permanent home with Mr. Antonio. He became a symbol of hope and gratitude, not just for the local community but for everyone who followed the story. A photo of Baidu, now healthy and running happily in a green field, went viral. He was no longer just a stray dog. He had become an unlikely hero who, with a small gesture, sparked profound changes in many lives. Mr. Antonio also became a beloved figure, known as the man who chose compassion over greed. The hardware wallet, initially a symbol of wealth, had transformed into a lesson about kindness and selflessness. And so, little Baidu showed that even the most unlikely encounters can change destiny, because sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness to transform the world around us.